Hi, this is Brad Linder with Liliputing, and this is the Topjoy Falcon, which is a tiny little laptop that you can not quite fit into a pocket, but it's going to go places where you might not want to take a larger laptop. It has an 8-inch display, full HD, 1920 by 1200 pixels. It weighs about 1.5 pounds, and it's powered by an Intel N5000 series processor. It's a quad-core chip, and it has 8 gigabytes of RAM, and this particular model has 128 gigabytes of storage, but it'll be available with up to 256. We've got a USB Type 3 port, headset jack, HDMI, and USB Type-C, which is also what it uses for charging. And speaking of charging, here is the power supply that was provided along with this demo unit. Now, I'm testing out a prototype here, which is why I'm going to call this a preview rather than a review. It was sent to me by Topjoy with this cable, which has actually been sort of modified because the port is a little deep. So if I plug anything else in, it doesn't quite go all the way in. So there's a couple of things to keep in mind that are going to be a little bit different on this preview than in the full retail version. But I wanted to give you an overview of what I've found in terms of design and performance and so forth. It has an aluminum chassis. It's got a vent on the side. It does have a fan, which is pretty audible. This is the air intake. On the bottom, we've got a speaker, which is not super loud, but you can hear it. And then we've got a couple of screws that you can open up the device with. There's a sort of little nub here that you can use to open it. And if the design looks familiar, that's because you probably have seen a very similar device called the One Mix Yoga or the GPD Pocket. So this is the One Mix Yoga, which I reviewed a little bit earlier this year, and it looks like almost the same device, but a little bit smaller because it has a 7-inch screen. The key differences between these are the screen size and weight, 1.1 pounds versus 1.5, and the processor. This version has an Atom X5 processor versus a Celeron or a Pentium N5000, and the difference in terms of performance is like night and day. The N5000 is a much, much better processor. Also, the demo unit I'm testing came with this pressure-sensitive pen, supports 1024 levels of pressure sensitivity, and it's going to be sold as an optional extra. During a crowdfunding campaign, this is going to sell for about $3.99 and up. Full retail price is supposed to be $6.99 and up. I think $3.99, it's a pretty great little device. I think $6.99 is a tougher sell, so we'll sort of have to see if it actually sells for that. So as a convertible, you can use it in tablet mode, in tent mode, in stand mode, or in laptop mode. This prototype does not have a particularly good automatic screen rotation, so I actually didn't spend a lot of time testing it as a tablet, but I have used it mostly as a laptop. And, you know, it does support the pen, so you can use it to write, to draw, etc. So let's go ahead and turn it on. Another thing is I'm actually hibernating right now, because there's a couple of issues in the prototype that affect overall performance. One of which is that if you close the lid, it doesn't turn off the screen. And another of which is if you flip it over into tablet mode, it doesn't turn off the keyboard. Those should both be resolved by the time that this is available via retail. And so I'm not going to dwell on those particular issues too much. Let's go ahead and enter a PIN. And there we go, we've got Windows 10. It's also capable of running other operating systems, and I've got a video that shows some of those. But let's take a look at a couple of the features here. So for instance, let's fire up Fresh Paint, and I'll show you that the pen works. Now keep in mind that my handwriting is pretty awful, as is my drawing. So let's just go ahead and demonstrate that it works with a fresh canvas. Full screen here. So it's detecting different sort of brush strokes. So pressure sensitivity works, and if that's something that matters to you, it's nice to know that. The pen overall does pretty much what you expect it to. So I can hover over different items to highlight them. I can use finer input than I would normally get with my fingers, which is nice on a 1920 by 1200 pixel display that's this sharp. And I can right-click by pressing the button when I do this. There's also an eraser button is the secondary button. So again, this is an optional accessory, doesn't cost that much more. And for people who really like pen input, I think it's going to be a nice perk to have. Finger input works pretty well, and that's mostly what I've spent my time using it with is a combination of finger and keyboard. Now, I'm going to apologize for the fact that you can't really see very much right now because the screen brightness is set all the way up. I'll show you the reason that I'm doing that in these review videos is because if I minimize it, we get a lot of flicker here. So you can see everything a little bit better when I do that, but what you gonna do? Let's go ahead and go to Liliputing. I'll play a little video for you, just demonstrate that that works. Overall, multitasking with 8 gigs of RAM and the Celeron processor has felt pretty pleasant. Hey, look, we have a Topjoy Falcon review here, or unboxing video. Let's go ahead and skip that ad.
I'm full screen. With Liliputing, and this is the Topjoy Falcon, which is a tiny little laptop computer with an 8-inch display. It's a little bit larger than some of the other little computers that we've seen lately.
So web browsing, video works pretty well. And again, multitasking is fine. The display scaling is set at 150% out of the box, and you can adjust that to 100% if you want to be able to sort of fit more stuff on the screen at once, but I wouldn't necessarily recommend it because then everything gets really, really kind of tiny and hard to see. So 150 definitely seems more comfortable for the most part. And it allows you to sort of split the screen, view 2 things at once if you wanted to. 125 might make it a little bit easier to do split screen. 100% might make it a little bit easier, but I think you're going to find yourself sort of putting your nose right up against the screen. So 150 seems to sort of be a sweet spot. I've played some games and some other things on it, and you can check out another video where I'm actually going to demonstrate that a little bit more. But what else should I show you? In terms of benchmarks, in terms of performance, it gets 4 to 6 hours of performance of battery life when I'm using it for work, and that's for typing blog posts and doing whatnot. It gets maybe 2 or 3 hours of battery life when I'm playing games, and some games are not going to play on it. It's a relatively low power 6-watt processor that actually cranks up a little bit to as high as 8 watts when you're playing certain GPU-intensive games. In those situations, that's why you get less battery life. The last thing I should probably really focus on is this keyboard. Typing on this little guy is something. So let's go ahead and dim the screen so we can see the keyboard a little bit better. And first thing I'll do here is bring up a typing test and show you that it is possible to type. Aesop was one of the great Greek writers. He is best known for his fables, stories that have a moral. They teach us something about how we should live our lives. So I'm getting around 60 words per minute here with 2 errors. So typing is definitely possible, but it took me a little while to get used to the keyboard in order to do that. And I'll show you why that is. It's a backlight keyboard, which is kind of nice to have on these little tiny devices, but the layout of a couple of keys is a little bit unusual. So one thing that bothers me a little bit is that the delete key is below the backspace key. I've sort of started to get used to that over time. Something that's a little harder to get used to for me is that the tab button is to the left of the number keys and not to the left of the Q as I'm used to seeing it. And what that means is that often when I try to hit the 1, I'll reach up, I'll hit tab, and suddenly the cursor moves, or I'm in a different part of the program, or something else problematic there. So it takes a little while to get used to the fact that the 1 through 0 keys are elsewhere. Likewise, the 1 through 0 are also the F1 through F10 if you press the function key. F11 and F12 are above them, because there's just not enough row in the keyboard to put them all side by side. Caps lock key is sort of half height to, or half width here to the right of, or left of the ASD FG, and this area down here is just kind of like a weird mix of options here. So we've got a bunch of punctuation keys and other function keys that are half width that you have to remember that the comma and the period are here, but then the apostrophe is here, the question mark is here, colon is here. So what happens is when I have to type punctuation, everything's going along smoothly as I'm typing words and numbers, and then I'm like, quotation, right, okay. colon. And so I do wind up having to glance down to see those from time to time. Overall, though, it took me a little while. When I first started typing, I actually found this slower than using the One Mix Yoga keyboard. They're very similar in terms of where everything is, but you notice that there's actually more space between the keys on the Falcon. And what that means is that when I'm typing here, my hands are bunched together more. So I'd gotten relatively comfortable typing on this, and it wasn't too bad. And then when I switched over here, I wound up thinking, oh no, I'm hitting the wrong key because my hands want to bunch up. Once I figured out that I didn't need to do that, it got a little bit easier to type, and I can go a little bit faster here. I'm probably more in the range of 50 words per minute versus 60 to 65 words per minute on this keyboard. Now on a larger keyboard, I can hit 100 words per minute. So it's not perfect, but I've also only really been using it for about a week and a half. So if this were your primary device, which I'm not sure I'd recommend, you'd probably get used to it more quickly. It is something you can use to write on the go. I've written several thousand word documents using it, and my hands don't feel particularly cramped at the end of it, but I would go faster on something else. Another thing to point out here is that the spacebar is divided up into two different sections, and there's this optical touch sensor, because there's just not enough room on a device with a display this small to have a full touchpad. So we've got spacebar, optical touch sensor, and then left and right click. On the prototype, the right click doesn't work. The left click can be a little bit wonky at times, but you can also tap. So we can right click, and what it did is, for some reason, it made the context menu come up far, far away from where the cursor is. It's usable, it's not perfect. It's a little bit easier to just sort of reach up and press and hold for a right click, or use the pen for a right click. So that's the keyboard, that's the general performance. Again, you can check out gaming, you can check out some other activities, you can check out Ubuntu and other Linux-based operating systems in other videos that I have for this, but overall I wanted to talk a little bit about what you can do with it, how it works, the fact that the same device is something that you could theoretically hold in your hands for reading books or documents. You could use it as a touchscreen device for playing games, or you could use it as a portable writing device. You could use it as a general purpose laptop, and at $399, I think it's actually a pretty versatile little machine that would make a nice secondary laptop for a lot of people. Maybe even for a little bit more money than that, it's probably pretty worthwhile. Once you start getting up into the $700 range, then it's competing with other types of devices like iPad Pros and Microsoft Surface devices, and the value proposition is a little bit trickier. Really what we're looking at is there aren't a lot of devices in this category right now. There's a couple of devices from GPD and from One Mix. This has a larger screen, a larger keyboard, that makes it harder to slide into a pocket, but a little bit easier to type on, and the screen maybe a little bit easier to see in certain situations. So if your goal is to have something that you can literally slide into a pants pocket, then maybe you're going to want something with a 7-inch screen that takes up a little bit less space. But if you want something that is just small, lightweight, easy to take places where you might normally just leave your laptop at home, then it is sort of nice to have a new option that's a little bit more powerful than the first generation One Mix Yoga or first generation GPT Pocket. In terms of benchmarks and raw performance, it's not quite as fast as the GPT Pocket 2, but it is larger and a little bit easier to use, while still being really pretty tiny compared to a full-sized 13 or 15 or 17-inch laptop, or even a 10 or 11-inch model. Not that we see a lot of 10-inch models these days. So it's a neat device. I like using it, but it's something that I wouldn't necessarily recommend for everybody. But if you're one of the people who's sort of enamored with this new crop, this new generation of small form factor laptops, it offers decent all-around performance, okay battery life, an interesting design, and a derivative keyboard that looks very much like some other models that we've seen, but is a little bit easier to type on, I would say. It would be nice if it had a camera. It would be nice if it had an SD card slot. So you literally can't put in a micro SD or an SD card, and you can't use it for video chatting. Those are features that are just missing from this particular model. But it's an interesting addition to the latest crop of mini computers that are portable devices that you can use on the go that are relatively inexpensive. So that's the Topjoy Falcon. Again, this is a prototype. The full retail unit will have a couple of different design features, and should be available soon for between $3.99 and $6.99 starting prices. This is Brad Linder with Liliputing.